Donald Trump attended a high-profile racing event in Washington and was met with audible boos while cameras were ordered away from the presidential suite. The order itself does not prove a cover-up, and the footage does not prove any medical diagnosis. But it creates a legitimate political question. Why were camera operators being told in real time to stop filming the president during a public event? And when you combine that moment with what Trump publicly amplified only hours later, the story becomes less about an awkward afternoon and more about the gap between the image of control and the reality Americans could actually see. Start with the part we can examine directly. During the event, personnel can be heard instructing camera operators to take their cameras off the president. The instruction is repeated. At another point, the crowd can be heard booing, and at least one person appears to shout, "Traitor." Those are observable events. What they do not establish is why the cameras were ordered away. Presidential security routinely controls access and positioning, and there can be legitimate security or broadcast reasons for restricting a shot. That is the strongest reasonable defense, and it deserves to be taken seriously. The problem is what was happening around the same time. Trump was being filmed in the presidential suite with Melania Trump, Natalie Harp, and other people around him. Separate clips appear to show people directing his attention toward the race. Another moment shows Trump receiving assistance or guidance while preparing to handle the green flag. Other footage captures him appearing uncertain with his jacket. None of that gives anyone sitting at home the ability to diagnose the president. A short clip is not a neurological examination. An awkward movement is not a medical record. And anybody claiming that a few seconds of video definitively establish cognitive decline is moving beyond what the evidence can prove. But the opposite standard is equally important. You cannot dismiss every uncomfortable public moment simply because it is politically inconvenient. The presidency is an extraordinarily demanding job. Americans have spent years hearing intense arguments about the age, stamina, and cognitive fitness of presidents and presidential candidates. If those standards mattered when Democrats controlled the White House, they still matter when Donald Trump controls it. The responsible question is not, can I diagnose this man from a video? The responsible question is there a recurring pattern significant enough to justify transparent medical information and serious scrutiny? And that brings us back to the cameras. If there was a routine security reason for ordering them away, that explanation matters. But notice what happens politically when officials restrict the shot at precisely the moment people are debating what the president is doing inside that suite. Instead of eliminating speculation, the restriction magnifies it. That is a communications failure, even under the most charitable interpretation. Then there is the crowd. Trump has built an enormous part of his political identity around spectacle. The cheering audience, the entrance, the arena, the motorcade, the visual demonstration that wherever Donald Trump appears, the country supposedly revolves around him. That is why boos at an event designed to produce presidential imagery matter politically, even if they tell us absolutely nothing scientific about national public opinion. One racing crowd is not America. It is not a poll. It cannot tell you how Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia, or Arizona will vote. But it can puncture a carefully cultivated image of universal enthusiasm. And once footage of that reaction circulates independently of the official presentation, controlling the visual becomes much harder. Ask yourself a narrower question. If a Democratic president were visibly struggling through several public moments, being booed, and camera operators were simultaneously being told to stop filming the presidential suite, would Republicans accept "there's nothing worth examining here" as a sufficient answer? That standard should not change with the party. And then, after all of this imagery began circulating, Trump's own public messaging supplied another remarkable piece of the story. Around 12:30 in the morning, Trump amplified material promoting what he called a midterm meltdown. The material warned of an extraordinarily chaotic period involving street violence, prosecutions, constitutional crisis, and political turmoil. But then the message turned those fears into an investment pitch, promoting supposed opportunities connected to government spending, surveillance, and security. That distinction is critical. Trump did not necessarily write every word contained in the material he amplified. Reposting something is not the same thing as personally authoring every claim inside it, but presidents understand that their accounts are enormous political megaphones. When the president amplifies material predicting domestic turmoil while simultaneously directing readers toward financial opportunities supposedly created by that turmoil, the amplification itself deserves scrutiny. Because look at the sequence Americans are being asked to process. During the day, the president appears at a spectacle intended to project confidence and strength. Cameras are ordered away from the presidential suite. Boos are audible. Clips circulate showing awkward interactions. Then, after midnight, the president's account amplifies an apocalyptic political financial pitch about instability, government spending, and a coming midterm meltdown. That is not proof of a personal meltdown. It is evidence of a presidency communicating two radically different realities at once. Publicly, strength and control. Through the material Trump amplified, extraordinary instability and opportunity supposedly created by that instability. And this is where reasonable people get manipulated, because one dramatic clip or one alarming repost can be stretched far beyond what it actually proves. That credibility trap is exactly what Don't Get Played is designed to help you avoid. Separating evidence from interpretation before you repeat the claim. The digital ebook is $9, one time. Use the first link in the description or pinned comment. There is another distinction we need immediately, because it is more important than any embarrassing clip. Political accountability is not the same thing as medical speculation. The public does not need amateur physicians diagnosing Trump from social media. It needs transparency from the people who actually possess relevant information. If questions about presidential fitness become persistent, the responsible response is not edited footage from supporters or opponents. It is credible medical disclosure, direct observation, unscripted public appearances, and consistent information from qualified professionals who have actually examined the president. That is the standard Americans should demand, regardless of whether the president is Trump, Biden, or anybody else. And there is a reason that standard matters beyond this particular event. Presidents make decisions involving military force, financial markets, emergency powers, and nuclear weapons. Their public condition is not merely celebrity gossip. At the same time, falsely declaring someone medically incapacitated based on ambiguous footage is also irresponsible, because it transforms legitimate scrutiny into partisan diagnosis. Both failures damage the public's ability to know what is real. So what can we responsibly conclude from this event? We can say Trump encountered audible hostility from part of the crowd. We can say camera operators were instructed to stop filming the presidential suite. We can say multiple public clips created questions about Trump's behavior and awareness during the event. We can also say those clips alone cannot establish cognitive impairment, and the camera restriction alone cannot establish that officials were deliberately hiding his condition. That boundary matters, because there is a temptation in modern politics to turn every unanswered question into a proven conspiracy. The stronger argument does not need that. The stronger argument is that an administration responsible for protecting public confidence should understand that restricting cameras during an already awkward presidential appearance demands a credible explanation. Otherwise, officials create the exact information vacuum in which speculation thrives. And Trump's late-night activity only deepens that problem. The midterm meltdown material he amplified reportedly described looming street violence, criminal prosecutions, constitutional crisis, and enormous government spending, before moving into financial recommendations tied to that environment. Whatever Trump intended by amplifying it, that is an extraordinary message to distribute from a presidential account. Consider the contradiction. A president tells Americans, explicitly or implicitly, that his leadership represents order, prosperity, and strength. Yet, his own account amplifies material whose sales proposition depends on anticipating chaos, government security spending, and political instability, which should carry more weight when judging presidential leadership. The image constructed around the presidency, or the conduct and messages the president actually puts before the public? That is the real issue underneath the racing footage. Politics increasingly operates through controlled images. The cheering section gets clipped. The hostile reaction gets clipped. The flattering angle circulates through one political ecosystem. The awkward angle circulates through another. Each audience receives enough reality to reinforce what it already believes. The camera restriction at this event becomes important precisely because it reminds us who benefits when citizens see less. That does not mean every restriction is sinister. It means transparency becomes more valuable when competing political camps are already fighting over what happened. The administration had authority over presidential security and access. Trump had authority over what his own account amplified. The public has no control over either of those things. What Americans do control is the standard they apply afterward. If the evidence shows boos, call them boos. Do not turn one crowd into a national election result. If footage shows an awkward or confused looking moment, describe what is visible. Do not turn seconds of video into a neurological diagnosis. If officials order cameras away, report the order. Do not automatically call it proof of a cover-up without evidence of motive. And if the president amplifies material predicting political chaos while pitching financial opportunities connected to government spending and instability, do not sanitize that into ordinary presidential communication either. That standard produces a conclusion that is actually stronger because it does not depend on exaggeration. Donald Trump had a politically damaging public appearance in which hostile crowd reactions and uncomfortable visual moments escaped the controlled presentation. Officials were heard ordering cameras away from the presidential suite, although the available evidence does not establish their motive. Hours later, Trump amplified extraordinary material built around a coming midterm meltdown and political instability. What remains unproven is equally important. Those clips do not establish a medical diagnosis. They do not prove that Melania Trump was confronting him over his condition. And without additional evidence about why the camera order was issued, calling it a deliberate attempt to conceal presidential impairment would go further than the record supports. But none of those limitations erase the political consequence. A presidency that sells strength depends heavily on controlling the perception of strength. At this event, that control visibly slipped. The boos were heard. The awkward moments circulated. The cameras themselves became part of the controversy, and the president's own late-night messaging supplied material that raised a completely different question about judgment. That is why this matters beyond one race. Another presidential clip, poll, accusation, or official explanation will arrive soon and demand an instant reaction from you. Don't Get Played is a digital method for becoming harder to manipulate and defending your political conclusions with evidence. It is $9 one time through the first link in the description or pinned comment. Because reacting politically is easy. Reaching a conclusion you can actually defend is harder.